Recently, I challenged myself to build the best cardboard crossbow ever, and this is what I came up with. Alright, so to start things off, I've got a couple paper templates cut out, and I'm going to make a very simple trigger mechanism using this really thick cardstock material. Now the whole idea behind using cardstock is that once I've cut out the trigger, I can peel back that top sort of glossy layer of the cardstock, and what that will do is really expose the fibers of the cardstock, and then once I apply a layer of super glue, it will really seep through those fibers and harden it, making it super strong and durable. Well, the trigger pieces are done. Now it's time to go ahead and work on the main body of the crossbow so I can actually show you how this mechanism works. Of course, all of these pieces were carefully designed and measured to ensure the trigger pieces would fit and work smoothly. Once the trigger mechanism was inserted, I could now build up some more layers of the crossbow. At this point, I went ahead and glued some wooden dowels inside these grooves, which I cut out in advance, and these wooden dowels are just going to make sure that the crossbow doesn't break at its weak points. Okay, well, everything's coming together pretty nicely. We've got a fully functional trigger here, which I'm pretty happy about. So basically how this works is when you pull back the bowstring, it will get caught on that lip right there, and when you pull the trigger, it releases. So pretty cool mechanism there. One thing I think is important to mention is on the middle piece of cardboard here, I kind of purposely offset the height a little bit, and that way when you put an arrow in there, it just kind of sits nice and flush in that groove, and that will also help with things like accuracy. Over on this side of the crossbow, we're not going to cover that up just quite yet, just because there's a couple other things we need to do before we can do that. But for now, let's just get back to work and start working on the actual bow part of the crossbow. So in total there are 6 layers here, and you'll notice that on those inner layers I cut out some grooves, and what I'm going to do with that is just insert some reinforcements into them, kind of like I did before, and that will really make sure this whole piece is strong and rigid. We really want this crossbow to be rigid because the more rigid this is, the more tension it can handle, which means the farther it can shoot. Now these wooden dowels are going to be the connecting point between this piece and the body of the crossbow, and that should make for a really strong connection between these two pieces. So at this point, it's time to start working on the limbs of the crossbow, which are those sort of outer arm pieces that are going to be able to swivel. And for that, I'm going to use a plastic clothes hanger, just because this is already the basic shape that I need it to be, and it's going to make the limbs a lot stronger. I went ahead and drilled some holes for where the pivot points were going to be, and then I covered those clothes hangers in cardboard. To attach the limbs to the crossbow, I cut out some pieces like this and used wooden dowels to make the limbs swivel. Before I continued working on the limbs, I just made myself a simple hand grip just to kind of get this step out of the way. Now it was time to make the wheel pulleys, or whatever you call it. Not really familiar with crossbow terminology, but these are those little wheel spinning thingies that the bowstring is going to wrap around. So if you're confused about how I kind of configured this bowstring, basically it starts here and then it wraps around this pulley and then it ties onto here. And same with the other side, that string is tied right there. Next, I hooked on some rubber bands onto the clothes hangers, and the way I did that is, if you remember back when I first showed you the clothes hangers, you'll notice here that there's already some hooks in place, and that's how the rubber bands are able to stay put. So what I do with those rubber bands is I just stretch them all the way down to the bottom here where that skewer is. Now these rubber bands are really important because this is essentially where all of the power of the bow is going to come from. As you can see, when you pull back the bowstring, you get that kind of spring effect, and that's what's going to propel the arrow forward. Now I made a stock for the crossbow, which I just glued in with a wooden dowel. Then I glued on this piece, which will help the arrow stay in position before it gets shot. Last thing I had to do was cover the whole thing in Mod Podge. Just kidding, I'm way too lazy for that. Hey, well if you liked this video, then you'll probably like this one too, where I made a pair of Nike shoes out of cardboard and then wore them in public to capture people's reactions. Click or tap the screen to check out that video. If you want to support this channel by becoming a patron, I'll leave a link in the description below to my Patreon page, but hey, you can always support this channel for free by subscribing to see future videos of my cool and creative cardboard projects.